Well, hi there. This is part two in a little series that Rohit and I did about how we help people figure out their application modernization strategy. Hopefully, you'll enjoy it. Also, coming up very soon, we have a totally free all online conference, Spring One, on September 2nd and 3rd. You can register for it at spring1.io. Now, we'll be talking about not only things like application modernization, but also all sorts of development ideas and frameworks and techniques and stories in the Java and Spring and other worlds. But also we have lots of case studies of large organizations that have really been transforming and changing and just overall improving the way that they do software so they can improve the way that they're doing their business. So if you're interested in that, just go to spring1.io and you can sign up and attend totally for free. And it's September 2nd and 3rd. So with that, let's jump right in as Rohit continues to show us how we help organizations sort out and kind of move along how to modernize their large portfolio so they can start using software as the core way to run and innovate and overall make their business and their organization better. I think we left off, you'll have to help me explain it correctly, but we left off sort of like we had been discussing how you figure out the sort of business and technical feasibility of the applications that you're going to go through and modernize. And I think I sort of cut you off at the point where I was saying, well, what are some problems that you have with modernizing and how do you kind of get over them? And how do you sort of drive towards actually doing things? But you had gone through a great way of showing how you figure out which applications to work on and kind of think about which ones to do. And then I left you off right there.
Right. So like just a small recap, right? So like this is your universe of applications, right? So certain applications like will stay as VMs and you will move them to the cloud, like run them. You just port the VM to run in AWS or on VCF or any of the. So like you just keep the VMs. Some you will like move to containers and then run them in the cloud, right? You will not make any changes to the application. So you're just like putting lipstick on a pig, but getting all the operational and flexible power of the cloud. So just take the stuff, pick the VM up, package it up, and run it in the cloud. No zero code changes. So like this is a zone of zero code changes. Then you want to leverage the productivity benefits, the developer productivity that you get by using more modern microservices, cloud native frameworks. So at that point, like you're taking your WebSphere or WebLogic app and converting it to using Spring Boot, or you're using a more modern framework, whatever it is, Quarkus, whatever you want. I do want you to use Boot, but here you have started to make some code changes to your application. Again, remember, these applications are like small, medium, and large size applications. So, if your portfolio is 1,000 apps, probably 500 end up here, like 200 end up here. Like you take another 200 to boot, then you have these megalith or monolith apps, like probably 5 or 10 in your portfolio. These you need to break into microservices, right? Because they are extremely strategic, and you can't just shovel them and run them in VMs, or you are actually doing development on them. These are value enhancing to your business. Like if you don't break them down, like you will get disrupted and eaten by your competitors. So like this is where we are right now in this talk track. We are on the top of the pyramid here, because this process that I'm going to explain of how to break down a monolith is the part we are here, just to frame in the map where we are in the trajectory.
And now, I think there's a point probably worth drawing out here, which we talked about last time, that you can't really do everything all at once very quickly, which is also, I think, a side of the there's no silver bullets, which is to say, like, if there's some magical way of doing everything, then you could do everything. It's a nonsensical way of putting it, but I think the quantity of, like, let's start with like 1 to 5 applications, right, is a good realistic way to kind of bootstrap your way into this process, rather than having we're going to do 500 things all at once. We're just going to do select all and then drag them over here and everything will work fine.
I mean, I call that the great M&M debate. Did I ever tell you quoted, the M&M debate.
No, what's that?
That great M&M debate is migrate and modernize, or modernize and migrate. Which path should you take? If you ask
Right,
the IT guys are like, select all, just move it to the cloud. I don't care, right? Migrate and then modernize. You ask the developers, they are like, no, what's the point just moving it to the cloud? We want to modernize it. We want to make it cloud native. Then we'll move it to the cloud. So like different people come at it from different points of view. I call it M&M, migrate and modernize, or modernize and migrate. Okay, so we have a monolithic application. We have established that this is a business critical application that is a monolith, right? And so the context is that we have a basically a massive monolith. It is strategic, and it basically gets deployed as one massive chunk. So like the first step in the process is what I call as like goal alignment. This is very important. You need to establish why you're modernizing this app, right? What is the core like business trigger, as a result of which you are modernizing this monolith? Is it because you want you want developer productivity? You are not releasing this. You are not making functional changes to the application fast enough from a business perspective. Is it like digital experience? Is it that your volume is going up and this app cannot scale? Like, what is the trigger for you to take this business critical system application and break it down into smaller services, right? To modernize this application. And so in order for you to do that, there is this thing, this pyramid that we draw, where we establish like the broad goals of the engagement. So like the goals, and then objectives, and key results. I think this is important from an executive alignment perspective. And then if you want, you can also write down all the risks to the process. So any exercise begins with alignment around why the hell are we doing this? What do we want to achieve? How do we measure success? Right? If you don't have that, then these programs keep going on and on and on, and you don't know whether you have hit any measurable marker or not.
Do you find that people know these things? Like, is this like a common thing that comes up, or do you have to spend some extra time to like figure out what the objectives are? I guess, to peel back the question I'm asking, like, I'm always curious, especially when it comes to modernization, if anyone remembers why this software is valuable.
Exactly. One, why is this software valuable? And two, everyone has their kind of own bias and like thought process around why we are modernizing it. It is critical at the executive VP, like the line of business level, the person who's sponsoring this $1 million project. They need to understand why are we doing this, so that everyone on rank and file also understands what are they going for. Because everybody is smart, everybody has their own thinking into why we are modernizing it. Like if the goal is we are modernizing this application so as to provide a comprehensive 360-degree customer experience to our customers. We are modernizing this application so that commercial credit can now be determined in less than 5 minutes with multiple providers. Like, you need to have some anchor, some foundational principle around why the modernization is taking place, so that everyone kind of aligns around it. So step number 1 is goal alignment. Step number 2 is understanding your domain. This is tough in certain situations, but we have a exercise called event storming, where everyone from business, whoever understands the business process, plus the technical team, plus the executives, plus designers, whoever, essentially charts out the business process of the current business process and the story of the system in terms of events, right? As you look back in life, your life has been molded by a series of events. Similarly, in an application encodes a business process, right? And a flow of data, right? And messages. So what we do is we write out these events, what is known as a domain event, like for instance, insurance policy processed, or another one is user authenticated, these events that are really not technical, but speak the language of the domain, like item shipped, for instance, or inventory decremented. These are words that both the technical people and the business people understand, but that tells you the story of of the system and the domain and the flow of data and messages and API across this domain. This process is called event storming, and this is conducted to understand and take inventory of what is actually going on in the system in the form of events.
And again, in this case, is this something like easily obtained, or like what's been your experience as far as like finding this information? Like, every time do you have to actually just get the people and start from fresh, or can you go get like I don't know, tell Rational Rose to give you some event storming thing?
um, my in the 40 or so of these event stormings that I have done, Kote, you almost never have this information. And if it does exist, it is all outdated. The value in the exercise is everyone coming together and discovering their own domain, bringing up conflicts. Hey, this doesn't work like this. This is supposed to work like this. So this is like a red spot where we need to fix the system. Or are you sure this works like this? So it surfaces all the conflict in the system, and it gives us, because the system is so vast, it's like an elephant. Everyone understands one portion of it. Someone understands the hind leg, someone understands the trunk, someone understands the back. You're putting together a vision, a view of the system by talking to all the stakeholders, because they almost, in an organization, they never talk to one another in a group. Like this event storm, like this system map, this business process map doesn't really exist. Or if it has existed, some enterprise architect has written it down in the ivory tower and has no relation to what it looks like in real life. So
Yeah.
the like in any process of fixing or of rebuilding or reimagination, you have to start with understanding how effed up you are, like how deep in the hole are you. So that begins with first understanding and acknowledging the current situation, which you do with this process or event storming. There are multiple ways of doing this. Don't get hung up on it. Some people do it in the form of like user journey maps. Um, there are kind of other variants of event storming as well. It's called work, but event storming has basically become kind of the industry standard now for decomposing massive systems to understand the process. Um, Oftentimes, what the mistake that people make in in this phase is that they start getting wedded to the individual workarounds and the technical nitty gritties of the system. That's not really the purpose of this. The purpose of event storming coming out is a set of domains, also called business capabilities. And so domains and business capabilities. So all the candidate services in your future target architecture get identified in this process, right? So let me give you a case in point. Like what could be the domains? Like pricing, ship in a retail, pricing, shipping, order management, right? Customer. So these are kind of like some of the domains that come out. Sub, store, right? So these higher level services in domain driven design, they're also called as bounded contexts. These come out of event storming. Also, it's as an interesting side effect, you get a prioritized list of the most painful things in your system, 1, 2, and 3. So you can attack and start decomposing the most high priority problem, which is number 1. So it's a lot of things that this exercise gives you.
You know, over the years, that's the interesting thing about doing the the domain modeling and making sure you're doing the event storming and get everyone in there, is you use it as sort of like a tool to spelunk through the software and like find out what it actually does. And I think as I suspect you'll get to, what's interesting about that then is it also defines what the software doesn't do that people might think it does do. And things that you don't have to modernize, right? Like, we don't really need this part anymore, and it doesn't need to do this. Like, it's an interesting way of cleaning up shop of the features that you have.
Yeah, like for instance, like in this, like you said, we no longer need to do step number 3 because we are going to like get rid of this or use a SaaS system, for instance. So it gives you a chance to, the word I like to do is reimagine the business. Like when you, so now you've taken inventory, you understand, you have a common language. I think that is also a very nice side effect of this is everyone now talks in this unique common language. It's also called ubiquitous language, where everyone now, when you say a term, everyone kind of understands what it means. So ubiquitous language is an output from here. So okay, think of this as like landing a plane, right? We were at like the 30,000 feet. We have descended a little bit. We are now at 20,000 feet. Now what happens is you have to actually, in order to build a new system, you have to create a backlog of stories. So we are kind of driving towards that. So in any complex system, there will be multiple end-to-end user flows. Into like a shopping cart flow, a procurement flow, a checkout flow. So there are multiple end-to-end use cases. We call these as thin slices, right? So you now have to identify like your top 3 thin slices. A user checks in, user puts items in the cart, and then user checks out and the item gets shipped, something like that, happy path. Or I have created a purchase order for this item, the item is sent to, the item is then procured from a vendor, the inventory is updated. So there are multiple thin slices. People call these steel threads, end-to-end use cases that that define all the use cases or the scenarios of the system. You have to pick like one thin slice. So in this phase, in phase number 3, you are identifying, right, thin slices. You now have the services, and you have now identified the thin end-to-end slice, which is the steel thread along which you are going to modernize. So like think of this as like if there are like all these thin slices together, right, aggregate and give you all the functionality in your system. But we can't do everything in one go. So you identify one thin slice, and then for that thin slice, you map out the interaction between all the domains. So what this means is our color, actually we use different colors for these domains, makes them fun. So blue, and this way orange. And then let's go back. So let's assume this is pricing, right? This could be inventory, service. This is product, for instance, right? This could be account. So now you kind of map the interaction of data and APIs, like data and APIs across these domains, and figure out what those external interfaces are in terms of events and APIs. And this process of mapping out the interaction of events like data and APIs for a thin slice, this process is called Boris. So then you know what is the exact API that the inventory service exposes to product. What is the exact API account exposes? What are the events that flow back and forth? For instance, when a product and over here is order 2. Like when an order is placed, then shipping needs to know, right? And it needs to do a certain set of actions. So this, like, think of this as like a wireframe or a context diagram. Tells you it gives you an understanding of all the interactions between the services to achieve the outcome of that thin slice. So this diagram looks like a spider diagram, and it's called Boris.
So in that example, what was the thin slice again?
So the thin slice here is that user has shopped and checked out like a concrete item, a shoe,
Okay.
um, at the with at the digital store.
So user is buys a shoe.
User buys a shoe,
Maybe
basically.
maybe just a replacement shoe. They've lost the right shoe and they need
So that's a complicated case. So that
one.
we would do that in like step number 2, because returns are handled in a different. So these are the, like, you're now talking
Right,
through all
right.
the use cases. So step first,
Yeah.
thin slices. I go to the store, I bought a shoe, I checked out, I paid for it, I got a receipt and a shipping notification. But when that happens in the thin slice, all these domains interact with one another, right? When an
Yeah.
order is shipped, an event is generated called order shipped, order placed. Now, who cares about order placed? Shipping obviously does, because he has to ship the item. Inventory does, because inventory has to reduce the inventory. Um, Product, there might be a recommendations engine. So, like, you have to model the flow of APIs and interaction. You have to model the interactions between these domains as events and APIs. And then there are other aspects too, which are like, we do other things as well, like UIs, and then read and write models. So now, as you can see, it starts becoming more and more technical. We're getting to the level where we need a backlog, right? So when we were at the event storming level, we were at the business language level, right? Because we tried not to go too deep technically. At this point, you are actually creating a blueprint or the target architecture.
When you're drawing the ovals there,
Yeah.
the different sort of parts of the system that events are bouncing around to satisfy buying some shoes. When do you determine not to have an oval? And the absurd example is like, if you're a company, you need to figure out revenue recognition,
Mm-hmm.
which is to say, when do I put this revenue on the books officially, no matter when when did I actually receive the cash versus when do I sell the thing? And so therefore I can report it on this quarter or not. And I would imagine, somewhere in the system is like the money for buying that piece of shoe, those shoes rolls up into finance somewhere so they can report that as part of their quarterly revenue. But that seems like maybe we shouldn't worry about that at the moment. or maybe that's somewhere else, right? Like, or I don't know, like when do you determine when to stop mapping the entire universe?
Proper scoping of the thin slices is important. Like in this case, like you could make a explicit decision that we won't model the downstream aspects of order processing. Well, how we try to make sure that we don't model everything in one go is that we try to make sure that our thin slices are scoped correctly. Or for instance, we will only start modeling like the initial half of the system, and then split it into 3 parts, and then stitch together a view across the 3 parts. Like for instance, pharmacy
Right.
management. In pharmacy management, there are like multiple stages. First, you have to submit a claim, right? The claim gets so you have to the process of submitting and accepting a claim is called pre-adjudication. Then the claim is adjudicated, and then there's a whole bunch of post-adjudication stuff that happens. So when we modernized the pharmacy management system, we split it into three, like we split the whole domain into 3 sub-domains: pre-adjudication, adjudication, and post-adjudication. And then we kind of we modeled each one of those areas separately, but we made sure that these oval circles stayed the same across all the 3, or were consistent, and then we stitched the picture together. So the only way to scale, if it is a massive thing, is that you have to break it down and bring it back together. Just like think how we do recursive code programming, right? Like you just break it down, then it all starts at the end. It all starts coming together. So the 2 answers: scope the thin slices correctly, and if the domain is too big, focus on big parts of the process. Like there's a natural ordering in the domain that already exists. Leverage that. So now I have my target architecture. Like so, 1, 2, 3, 4. The fifth step is what we call as tactical patterns, right? So what this means is there is already probably a, like let's take the pricing poll. So I want to create a new pricing microservice, right? That's what I want to do. But in all likelihood, there is already an existing system that provides pricing. It's probably some vendor product that exposes pricing, right? There is already an existing interface that exists for pricing. So what we have to do is we then expose this API, but wrap all of this up. So we have our external API, and then initially we may just get the prices from the vendor, from the vendor, and eventually we might break this link and replace it with our own proprietary like pricing engine. So a bunch of tactical patterns have to be run, including strangler, facade, facades, and anti-corruption that graft in our newer services on top of the older services and get rid and strangle out the older services. So strangler, facade, and anti-corruption layer are like the three major patterns that we use to gradually coexist. Like think of it as like coexist, and then our stuff gets bigger and bigger and bigger, our services gets bigger, and the existing service to vendor or in the monolith shrinks. And that's how eventually these oval circles representing the new services are the only ones remaining. All this, the old vendor stuff goes away, or the monolithic stuff goes away.
What is the what's that anti-corruption layer? I know the other two, but what's that one?
Anti-corruption layer is very simple. Anti-corruption layer is like what you are doing is you have your new service, right? This is my new Chinese service. I have my own set of classes and objects and model within it. This is my code. I have implemented pricing and inventory in the way I see fit. But the external system, or there are consumers that expect a certain interface, like a certain API, like the old API. But I don't want to expose the old API because the old API perpetuates the mistakes. So I keep this translation layer whose job is, so this is the ACL, to translate from the old to the new and from the new back to the old. So he is basically a glorified translator that understands the old and translates it to the new, and takes the new and translates it to the old. So that's the anti-corruption layer, because it prevents the corruption of your domain from the older API and the mistakes of the old. That's why it's called anti-corruption layer.
So you can basically evolve, to use your word, the domain into, you know, a new way without actually changing all the backend services. So you don't have to go back to like the pricing thing that might have its own weird names for things and concepts, but you could modernize it nonetheless.
Right. So like in terms of pricing, right, initially you have multiple, let's say this is the web channel, this is the mobile channel. Let's say like there's some other API channel, right? So this is the old API. Like all these called the old pricing, right? But then we are creating a new pricing system here, right? So typically what happens is in these systems, usually they talk directly to the pricing system. When we modernize it, what the first thing that we do is like we make one common API here, right? So that we can switch from this pricing system to this new pricing system. But if we cannot do that, then what happens is we introduce like what is known as the anti-corruption layer that still exposes the old APIs, but then translates it to the new ones. So he handles all the mapping from the old, from the new to the old.
So the ACL can go both ways, basically. Yeah. It's not only for like a new way of thinking about the old stuff, but you can the new thing can behave like the old thing.
Yeah, exactly. That is the 140 character definition of an ACL. The new thing can behave like the old thing with the help of this sidecar ACL that is bolted on the side, right?
Right. Okay.
So that's anti-corruption layer. And the last step in this process, Kote, which is step number 6, is that all these interactions result in a set of user stories for each slice. So then we create these user stories, and then for each slice. So let's say this is end-to-end flow 1, this is end-to-end flow 2, and then we create end-to-end flow 3. At some point, we define the MVP. This is MVP 1. This is MVP 2. So we do what is known as like a journey map or a user story map to identify, okay, at this point, what value have we delivered to the business when we have done stories 1, 2, and 3. When we have done stories 1, 2, and 3, we can replace pricing. When we have done stories 4, 5, and 6, we have changed inventory. So it is critical to lay out all the stories and then map out what the MVPs are to demonstrate return value. Because the biggest mistake organizations make is that they create the blueprint, they create this target architecture, but they don't know how to get there. It is important to sequence out all the work, stories and MVPs, and assign a business value to each MVP so that you can track and measure the progress towards modernizing the system.
When you're writing a new application or modify an existing one, a lot of what we in Tanzu Pivotal Agile Land espouse is like, sort of learning as you do it what the functionality needs to be, and kind of experimenting with is this the best way to implement this feature, or is there another way to do it? But I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, but it seems like when you're modernizing something, you sort of know what the end result needs to look like. So you can spend more time on upfront planning because you're sort of saying like, I want that, but modernized, right? Like don't necessarily like change the functionality and how it behaves, just like modernize the code along the way so you can do a lot more upfront planning than you would normally do in a more agile.
Yeah, you have to do more upfront planning. There's no, and that is why you do these like sticky based processes like event storming and Boris, and like all this up to step number 6 is all now in, like, you are still in user sticky land. You have not written a single line of code so far. So reorienting all this in stickies is quick, right? Like if you don't, spending the 2 weeks designing this might save you 6 to 8 months of reworking code later. And which is why we have such a rigorous process around called Swift. This whole 6-step process is Swift, which models the system. It allows you to play, okay, maybe this is not the service, we should call it this. Maybe this domain is incorrect. By keeping this all at the whiteboarding level or at the sticky level, we can change things up and get to a right solution and go through that initial 5 iterations very quickly in our mind before we start developing. But after we start, again, we are always open to changing things, but there is a higher, you have to think through your starting point very rigorously when you are modernizing a system that's generating $1 billion of revenue. It's not going to be enough to just show up and say, hey, okay, why don't we just rewrite this? You need to have a rationale. And like this rationale starts from goals and objectives, right? These influence all these decisions downstream.
And then also, I mean, 2 weeks in the grand scheme of things isn't a very long time. and if you, as you're going over, if you put enough agility into the tools that you can just move things around, as you're saying, with sticky notes, like there is that ability to learn and change things, but at worst, you haven't spent like 3 months doing a huge amount of analysis. You've just done a couple of weeks and you're moving more incrementally. Yeah. So you still do a large amount. Well, you still do upfront analysis, but you do it in smaller chunks than doing everything all at once, which gives you more of that ability to change as you learn things, or not necessarily change, but determine the better way to do things as you're working on it.
Yeah, and this stuff all lives in Miro. So it's all kind of this architecture diagram, the event storm, the goals, everything is in Miro. So the architecture is extremely well documented. And unlike in the past, like the stuff in Miro is a living document and you can drag and drop things and move things around. And then the code is written eventually. So I feel like this process, in fact, like forcing the remoteness on this has helped in the short term, it has made collaboration difficult, but in the long term, because you persist all the artifacts in Miro, it creates a trail of provenance for the design and helps you understand why certain decisions were taken and keeps a living copy of the architecture for you as you design the system. So you don't have the same problem as before, where no one knows where they're like what the system does, and like the 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 issue where this process breaks down, Kote, is when you want to understand the domain and you only involve the technical people, then you get a very technical biased solution. You might just build the same thing over again. So I think coming back to one of your key points, when you go through this redesign or reimagination, you should use this as a license to throw away stuff, to really ask what is the business problem we are solving, because we might not need a shipping service. We might use USPS for that, or maybe it's time to rethink order processing. So use this as a license to reimagine your business process, because like ultimately that's the goal. We are solving for 360-degree digital experience. We are not solving to create a new order microservice. Then no one, like, who cares, right? The outcome is what you need to keep in mind.
All right, so we got to the point, I think, where we broke things up and we were figuring out the tactical patterns to start interacting between the new and the old parts of the system. We've almost found the I know in this world, the word, seam means something else, but we found the kind of edges of the things that we're working on, and we systematically went through and worked on the user stories in various streams, and we've been moving along. And I don't know, that's sort of like midway through the happy, joyful journey of modernization. Yeah. Where do things progress from?
Oh yeah, so now you have done the 6-step process. So this, I draw this journey like this. So we started here, we ran the Swift process, right? And then like we did all the 6 steps, which is goal alignment. I'm just gonna goal, event storming, thin slices, Boris, tactical patterns, and backlog. So now you have a backlog here. Right. Now you do what is known as an inception, where you organize the backlog and like organize things in like 4 to 6 week increments. So like inception creates stories enough for 4 to 6 weeks, and then for every week, we run iterations every week. So at the end of the stories for that week, you then do demos, a retrospective, right? And then like this cycle basically repeats for 4 to 6 weeks. And every week you show value, and then you track the MVPs that you have achieved: MVP 1, MVP 2, MVP 3. Your flywheel, as they like to call it, has begun for modernization. Now you may choose to do this after 4 to 6 weeks. You may go back to this and run this process again. So it's not like this is a one-time process. You do this for 4 to 6 weeks, you see where you are, then you can redo the process for a different domain or the same domain. So it is the longer, so this whole process kind of continues in these loops.
How have y'all arrived at like the 4 to 6 weeks rule of thumb? Like I'm interested in what the common time chunking is.
I really like 6 weeks. Okay. And I like a team size of 3.25. It's kind of my, like if I were to, like tomorrow, if I were to get fired and create a startup, I would do 6 weeks at 3.25. I actually have a blog post on this. Like, I don't know if you care, but that explains my rationale of 6 weeks and 3.25. Even the Basecamp guys, in their Shape Up book, I think they have a much more sophisticated reason for using 6 weeks. I think 6 weeks is just the right amount of time where you get momentum and can demonstrate value, but are not completely wedded to the outcome, so that you don't have sunk cost fallacy. 6 weeks is that like happy path where even if stuff hasn't worked, you can take the feedback to turn the ship around. If you do it as 12 to 14 weeks, you might end up with the sunk cost fallacy, like we already spent so much effort in this, like we can't really rework this, right? So I think, and a team of bigger than 3.25 is just like initially it just creates a lot of drag, because there is a lot of collaboration initially. Having more than 3 people means that now, if you have a team of 4, then one person is just doing coordination. So like if you look at there's like the theory of how many nodes have to be there. It's like the two pizza teams and stuff like that. I feel like 3.25, 6 weeks gives you like the idea. And the 0.25 is like the PM or the product manager who helps craft the
Yeah.
stories. It can be 3.5 or whatever. But 3.25 at 6 weeks with breaks in between to reorient and like redo some part of the initial process gets you to, and then at 6 weeks you can show value. Your stakeholders can get an understanding, and you demoing every week too. So it's going to be a crazy 6 weeks. Then you take maybe a breather, and then start the whole thing, start the machine again.
There's at least three things I think that drive that chunking, and it is it's feasible to do something in 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Right? Like one day would be too small, and a week would probably be too small, and to build it up from absurdness. So you can do something significant in 6 weeks. And then I hadn't really thought of the second point you made, that it also means you're not afraid to, at worst case, throw away 6 weeks worth of work. And then also the third thing is like, that's probably as long as your bosses are going to let you go without seeing if you're doing anything. So you have to like demonstrate and kind of show progress to kind of refuel sort of the corporate permission and the resources to keep going. And four to 6 weeks seems like about the right amount of chunking for that. I wanted to ask this because it's one more avenue to kind of reverse engineer how to scope things, right? So when you're thinking about how do we scope a backlog, how do we scope the items in the backlog, in the back of your head, you're always like, and we have 4 to 6 weeks to be done with this. So a backlog item isn't going to be like rewrite pricing, right? It needs to be scoped down to something that fits into that time period that we have.
Exactly. At the weekly demo, you call your first line manager, or whoever is like your most immediate stakeholder. At the 6 week mark, you're calling the VP of line of business or the CTO, and it's like and then you have to, like, because things will actually get, in reality, things get worse before they get better. Modernization is hard. You now have the original team maintaining the critical system. Now you have this new team branching out code. So it's lived through enough of these where like you understand that this is like, that's why you don't do this for all the applications, right? You do these for applications that are critical systems that make sense. And then we discuss the easy modernization too. Like, this is what I just showed you is like the Ferrari of modernization. But remember, we also discussed the Camry and the Accord, which is, hey, let's just break this into UI and backend processing. Let's just break this into like there are this one year file has 8 war files. Let's just make each war file. There are cheaper ways of doing this too. But you do this when you know that, hey, this system is critical for me to be competitive. It's going to make me revenue for the next 5 years. If I don't invest, Amazon is going to come and basically make mincemeat out of me. So like that's why you do it.
To start to close out, does this process ever end?
Yeah, that's a good point. The process has a point where active development kind of subsides and it goes into maintenance mode. So you may not need as big a team for the entire life of the project. But the thing is, if you do this right, like all your legacy team now starts developing on these newer services. So it's not so much as the process ends, but like now you have gone from working on the old system to the entire team working on the new system and keeps developing all the services and so on. So there is a gradual shift of people working from the old to the new, right? Eventually, we should expect maybe a single person maintaining the old system and then everyone working on the new system. And then the cycle of life goes on. These services are ever evolving. As long as these services are being under development, like this system keeps running.
And kind of as you're describing, it seems like, well, in most of the large organizations we talked with, like, even a new system in 3 years is going to be an old system. So, right, like as every piece of software that you write now under some new cool way of doing stuff is eventually going to go through this process, right? Like new things will come about and people will move around, and legacy software is just yesterday's brand new software that everyone really liked. And so, you know, I would hope long term that, like, as an organization maybe spends a year or so going through this cycle, part of the modernization is they're better at remembering all the old systems. So a lot of that analysis that you were going through at the beginning and things like that they're more attuned to that. And they more treat their IT estate as more of this living system that needs to be continually nurtured instead of just sort of like locked in a closet until it becomes burdensome. But getting those longer term enterprise architectural habits in place is hopefully something that people learn and put into effect, because you'll always have legacy stuff, but at least you can make modernizing it easier than it was last time.
The importance of these systems is going up. Like, disruption is real. Like, most non-IT, like, as we say, old school businesses understand that, like, unless they modernize and keep modernizing, like, they will go out of business. Like, that's real. So, like, there is increased focus on modernization and keeping it going for their own strategic advantage, not just from an IT perspective.
All right. Well, I think that's a pretty good place to end. Now, I'll put a link in the show notes we have to your blog and the one you mentioned. But do you have a Twitter handle or anything?
Yeah, it's just
you would direct people towards?
It's just 4 letters. 5 RKELA.
There you go. So and there's always fun stuff on your blog to keep up with. Well, thanks for doing a little series here. We'll have to visit you again in the land of happy modernization and see how things are going.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, as always, this has been a simulcast episode of Tanzu Talk, also streamed on our Twitch thing. Now, if you want to get other live streaming things, I think every Tuesday we stream at least one thing. If you go to twitch.tv/VMware Tanzu, you can find that. And we're also always tanzu.vmware.com/podcast. You can find the show notes, everything else. So with that, we'll see everyone next time. Bye-bye.